Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Friday, August 11th, 2023. Attorney General Merrick Garland appoints a special counsel in the Hunter Biden investigation, and that special counsel is U.S. Attorney David Weiss, who has been the prosecutor in the investigation up to this point. We'll hear from the Attorney General and reaction from a Republican and Democratic member of Congress. White House defends the possible deal with Iran in which 5 detained Americans would be set free and Iran would get access to $6 billion of its money that has been frozen due to sanctions. The death toll continues to rise from the wildfires on the Hawaiian island of Maui as the fight continues to get the fires under control and thoughts turn to dealing with the widespread damage and rebuilding. We'll hear from Vice President Kamala Harris. More Republican presidential candidates descend on the Iowa State Fair, including former Vice President Mike Pence and Miami Mayor Francis Suarez. And the Library of Congress's National Book Festival is this weekend. We'll get a preview of C-SPAN's Book TV live coverage from the Washington, D.C. Convention Center. From NBC News, U.S. Attorney David Weiss will be appointed special counsel in the ongoing probe of the president's son, Hunter Biden, Attorney General Merrick Garland announced Friday. The announcement came moments before prosecutors said in a court filing that plea negotiations with Hunter Biden's team on tax charges brought by David Weiss's office had fallen apart and revealed that the case is now expected to go to trial. That from NBC News. The Attorney General spoke for about 5 minutes at the Justice Department in Washington.
Good afternoon. I'm here today to announce the appointment of David Weiss as a special counsel, consistent with the Department of Justice regulations governing such matters. In keeping with those regulations, I have today notified the designated members of each House of Congress of the appointment. In February 2018, after being nominated by the former president and confirmed by the Senate, Mr. Weiss was sworn in as the United States Attorney for the District of Delaware. Mr. Weiss had been a career prosecutor, having served previously in the office for more than a decade. Beginning in 2019, Mr. Weiss, in his capacity as U.S. Attorney and along with federal law enforcement partners, began investigating allegations of certain criminal conduct by, among others, Robert Hunter Biden. That investigation has been recently referenced in federal criminal proceedings in the District of Delaware, and as noted in those proceedings and other public statements by Mr. Weiss's office, that investigation remains ongoing. In February 2021, U.S. Attorney Weiss was asked to remain as U.S. Attorney for the District of Delaware and, in that capacity, to continue to lead the investigation. As I said before, Mr. Weiss would be permitted to continue his investigation, take any investigative steps he wanted, and make the decision whether to prosecute in any district. Mr. Weiss has told Congress that he has been granted ultimate authority over this matter, including the responsibility for deciding where, when, and whether to file charges, and for making decisions necessary to preserve the integrity of any prosecution consistent with federal law, the principles of federal prosecution, and departmental policies. In a July 2023 letter to Congress, Mr. Weiss said that he had not to that point requested special counsel designation. On Tuesday of this week, Mr. Weiss advised me that in his judgment, his investigation had reached a stage at which he should continue his work as a special counsel, and he asked to be so appointed. Upon considering his request, as well as the extraordinary circumstances relating to this matter, I have concluded that it is in the public interest to appoint him as special counsel. This appointment confirms my commitment to provide Mr. Weiss all the resources he requests. It also reaffirms that Mr. Weiss has the authority he needs to conduct a thorough investigation and to continue to take the steps he deems appropriate independently, based only on the facts and the law. Mr. Weiss will also continue to serve as U.S. Attorney for the District of Delaware. As special counsel, he will continue to have the authority and responsibility that he has previously exercised to oversee the investigation and decide where, when, and whether to file charges. The special counsel will not be subject to the day-to-day supervision of any official of the department, but he must comply with the regulations, procedures, and policies of the department. Consistent with the special counsel regulations, at the conclusion of Mr. Weiss's work, he will provide me with a report explaining the prosecution or declination decisions reached by him. As with each special counsel who has served since I have taken office, I am committed to making as much of his report public as possible, consistent with legal requirements and department policy. Today's announcement affords the prosecutors, agents, and analysts working on this matter the ability to proceed with their work expeditiously and to make decisions indisputably guided only by the facts and the law. The men and women undertaking this investigation are public servants who have dedicated their careers to protecting the citizens of this country. The appointment of Mr. Weiss reinforces for the American people the department's commitment to both independence and accountability in particularly sensitive matters. I am confident that Mr. Weiss will carry out his responsibility in an even-handed and urgent manner and in accordance with the highest traditions of this department. Thank you.
If U.S. Attorney Weiss had the authorities he needed, why does he need to be a special counsel? Do you still have faith in U.S. Attorney Weiss after the deal fell apart?
Attorney General Merrick Garland at the Justice Department. Spokesperson for Congressman Jim Jordan, Republican from Ohio, and Judiciary Committee Chair Russell Dye putting out a statement. David Weiss can't be trusted, and this is just a new way to whitewash the Biden family's corruption. Weiss has already signed off on a sweetheart deal that was so awful and unfair that a federal judge rejected it. We will continue to pursue facts brought to light by brave whistleblowers as well as Weiss's inconsistent statements to Congress. And the U.S. House Oversight Committee Chair James Comer, Republican from Kentucky, with this statement. The Biden Justice Department is trying to stonewall congressional oversight as we have presented evidence to the American people about the Biden family's corruption. Congressman Jason Smith, Republican from Missouri, chair of the Ways and Means Committee, was interviewed on Fox News Channel after the Attorney General's appointment of the special counsel.
I think that this should be concerning to all Americans, that this is an attempt to whitewash the Biden family corruption. I mean, Mr. Weiss is the single architect over that sweetheart plea agreement deal that the judge in Delaware threw out just a few weeks ago as saying it was awful and unfair. There were provisions within that sweetheart plea deal that granted complete immunity to Hunter Biden for these crimes and future crimes, and she even stated that she's never seen anything like that before. And who was the architect of that? Now the person who, Garland, who President Biden's Justice Department just appointed to be special counsel. I am very fearful that appointing the special counsel is just an attempt to stonewall Congress's investigation of the Biden family.
That is a remarkable reaction. Byron York says this. Does it seem somewhat strange that Garland appointed the guy who approved the sweetheart deal with Hunter Biden to now be the special counsel for Hunter Biden? Mark Meredith just a moment ago at the DOJ referenced this moment. It happened in the White House press briefing room not too long ago when asked if the president would consider pardoning his son. Listen.
Is there any possibility that the president would end up pardoning his son?
No.
Well, is there?
I just said no. I just answered.
That was a hard no, July 27th. A lot has changed since then. We'll see what we hear from the White House. They said they had no heads up on this announcement from Merrick Garland ahead of it happening today. What do you expect we'll hear from the president?
Well, let me just say, the president said that he wouldn't pardon his son, but this is the same president who several years ago said that he knew nothing of his son's business dealings. And then after the Ways and Means Committee released the public testimony of the two IRS whistleblowers that proved differently, the president then came out with the statement saying that he wasn't involved with his son's business dealings. The only thing that has changed over the last several months are comments from the Biden family. Our IRS whistleblowers have been consistent, and they're the ones that were brave to come forward to release all this information.
Congressman Jason Smith, Republican from Missouri, on Fox News. Congressman Raja Krishnamoorthi, Democrat from Illinois, was interviewed today on CNN.
Well, I think all along the Justice Department and Merrick Garland said to U.S. Attorney Weiss that if he requests that particular designation, he'd be granted it. So I think it's only appropriate that they followed through when he did request it. But I think that it doesn't take away kind of the flaws in the Republicans' arguments with regard to Hunter Biden. And, I had a chance to actually question the whistleblowers who came forward with allegations of wrongdoing in the investigation of Mr. Hunter Biden. And the problem with their fundamental allegations are that the alleged wrongdoing happened at a time when Donald Trump was president, Bill Barr was the attorney general, and of course, Mr. Weiss had been appointed by Donald Trump. And so allegations of political bias don't seem to hold weight when, Mr. Trump was ultimately in charge of the Justice Department and its handling of this investigation.
Do you have confidence that this designation is necessary?
I don't know if it's necessary. I do know that Mr. Weiss has requested it in light of what happened at this hearing recently, but it appears that Mr. Weiss had quite a bit of latitude to pursue the investigation in the manner that he saw fit. Again, my Republican colleagues somehow claim that Hunter Biden's actions reflect poorly on President Biden, that somehow this involves wrongdoing by President Biden, but there isn't a scintilla of evidence to show that President Biden did anything wrong in connection with Hunter Biden. And I think that Mr. Weiss has not surfaced any such evidence because there is none.
Congressman Raja Krishnamoorthi, Democrat from Illinois, on CNN. And Speaker Kevin McCarthy, Republican from California, with this tweet: "This action by Biden's DOJ cannot be used to obstruct congressional investigations or whitewash the Biden family corruption. If David Weiss negotiated the sweetheart deal that couldn't get approved, how can he be trusted as a special counsel? House Republicans will continue to pursue the facts for the American people." An Associated Press story: the federal judge overseeing the election conspiracy case against Donald Trump warned on Friday that there are limits on what the former president can publicly say about the investigation as he campaigns for a second term in the White House. Presiding over her first hearing for the case, U.S. District Judge Tanya Chutkan in Washington heard arguments on how to structure a protective order that would prevent a public airing of all the evidence turned over by prosecutors. But she also used the forum to address the case's unprecedented mix of legal and political concerns. Judge Chutkan stressed that political considerations would not guide her decisions. She also repeatedly said Donald Trump was subject to the court's rules as a defendant before trial, even as he runs for the 2024 Republican nomination for president. Chutkan told Trump's lawyers, "Your client's defense is supposed to happen in this courtroom, not on the internet. I will take whatever measures are necessary to safeguard the integrity of the case." And the Associated Press article continues: Judge Chutkan agreed with Donald Trump's defense team on a looser version of a protective order for evidence in the case, but she largely sided with the prosecution on what sensitive materials should be protected. This is Washington Today. The White House is defending a possible deal between the U.S. and Iran in which Iran would release 5 Americans who have been, in the U.S.'s determination, unjustly detained, and $6 billion in Iranian funds held in South Korea because of sanctions would be unfrozen and made available to Iran. John Kirby, spokesperson for the White House National Security Council, took reporters' questions today.
I know that you guys don't want to talk about the details of the release of the prisoners yesterday, but if Iranian frozen money is to be released, how can you make sure that an amount that was circulated between $6 to $10 billion will not be used for any other purpose except for food and medicine as a condition by the U.S.?
This is an ongoing negotiation, so I think hopefully you all can understand why I can't get into too much detail about the modalities of it and how it's all going to shake out when it hasn't shaken out. The deal's not done; those Americans aren't home yet, and so there's going to be a limit to how much detail we can offer. But on this issue of the funds, first of all, you said it was like 6 to 10. It's 6, and again, without going into any specifics about how this plays into the deal, I think it's important to remember that there will be restrictions on what Iran would be able to do with any of those funds. We're talking about moving those funds, which were set up in what's known as a significant reduction exception account. This goes back to 2018. Previous administration set these accounts up in various different countries to ensure that Iran's oil proceeds can only be used for bilateral trade that's not sanctionable. Again, nothing wrong with that, of course. These particular funds remain untouched for a variety of reasons, unlike the other accounts around the world. Some of those reasons were technical. But essentially, the funds could only be accessed for food, medicine, medical equipment that would not have a dual military use, and there would be a rigorous process of due diligence and standards applied with input from the U.S. Treasury Department. The bottom line is we would have full visibility about where the money was going and for what purpose, and we're comfortable that the levers are in place to be able to manage it in that way.
John Kirby, Strategic Communications Coordinator for the National Security Council, in an online audio news conference. Senator Tom Cotton, Republican from Arkansas, tweeting, "While we always welcome the release of American hostages, if they are in fact released after President Biden pays Iran $6 billion in ransom, this craven act of appeasement will only embolden the Ayatollahs to take more hostages." Another Associated Press story today, China has detained a worker from a military-industrial group on suspicion of spying for the CIA, National Security Authorities said Friday, adding to the list of public accusations of espionage between Beijing and Washington. The Ministry of State Security, China's civilian spy agency, said in a statement that a military-industrial worker named Zhang had been providing military secrets to the CIA in exchange for large sums of money. The White House says President Biden spoke by phone today with Hawaii's Governor Josh Green after the governor completed a survey of destruction across Maui from the wildfires. White House says the governor provided the president with an update and assessment of Hawaii's latest needs and thanked the president for the support of FEMA and other federal agencies. The wildfires in Maui have killed at least 55 people and caused billions of dollars in property damage. Vice President Kamala Harris spoke to reporters today about the fires as she boarded a plane at Joint Base Andrews in Maryland, flying to Chicago.
The president and I are deeply concerned about what is happening in Hawaii and in Maui in particular. We are monitoring it closely. We are coordinating federal resources to swiftly get there to support the work that has to be done, both in terms of recovery, but to just support the folks on the ground. It is tragic what has happened there. I have full faith and confidence in the leadership in Hawaii to stay on top of this, but they will have our full support. And it really is tragic. And of course, the facts are unfolding as more information comes together around what is actually happening in terms of the damage and of course the loss of life. So our prayers are with the families and with the leaders as well. Do you have any plans to go to Hawaii to tour any of the wildfire damage? We're monitoring it. You know, we want to obviously, as with most of these kinds of situations, do whatever is in the best interest of the folks on the ground, and we don't want to distract from the resources that need to go into the victims of this tragedy, and of course the need that the first responders have to be able to focus on that issue and not worry about focusing on us if we're there. So that's always something that we monitor and balance out, but I'll keep you posted.
Vice President Kamala Harris on the tarmac at Joint Base Andrews. Hawaii's Governor Josh Green, a Democrat, posting a video Thursday night in front of the destruction.
Aloha, Hawaii. Behind me, you can see the devastation here in Lahaina. We're on Front Street. I just walked the entirety of this road with Senator Schatz and Mayor Bisson. It's extraordinary. It is tragically gone. We know that many people are suffering. The fatality numbers will climb somewhat today, and we'll have those numbers for you. Everyone, love your neighbors, support them, because this is devastating for Maui. We probably have well over 1,000 buildings that have been destroyed, many Hundreds of families have been displaced. We'll rebuild. The president has already, just in 6 hours, authorized and approved our request for emergency support, but it's going to be a long haul. Again, the devastation is behind me, but we will put hope out in front of us. Aloha.
Hawaii Governor Josh Green in a video from Maui Thursday night. He and other officials also held a news conference on Maui. U.S. Senator Brian Schatz, a Democrat, was there.
Josh got a call from the president. I just got a call from the vice president. Leader Schumer called and assured me that he was going to do everything he could in terms of a disaster supplemental funding bill. And one of the best pieces of news, which was fortuitous this week, is that Bob Fenton from Region 9, who has been a longtime friend of Hawaii through FEMA, through other wildfires, through volcanic eruptions, through floods and tropical storms, is here and is one of the most knowledgeable people on disaster response and recovery that you could possibly get. And he's here physically with us, walked Front Street, has done all of it, and is going to stay for the duration, even as the FEMA administrator, I think, arrives tomorrow evening. So we are united. We are not underestimating the task in front of us in the next couple of days and couple of weeks, but also a couple of years. This is going to be a long period of recovery, but we will rebuild.
Senator Brian Schatz at a news conference on Maui Thursday night. A Washington Post article has this: as the rescue efforts continue and people are scrambling for shelter after the wildfires have left parts of Hawaii devastated, the message from locals and natives to anyone planning a vacation has become loud and clear. Now is not the time to visit Maui. Kaniela Ang, the national director of the Green New Deal Network and a former state lawmaker, posted on Twitter, "Don't come to Maui. Cancel your planned vacations. Survivors need the hotel rooms. Give our community time to grieve and heal." On Wall Street today, the Dow up 105, S&P down 4, NASDAQ down 76. Wholesale prices, writes United Press International, minus volatile items like food and energy, saw the sharpest increase over the 12-month period to July since early 2023, the U.S. government said Friday. The Producer Price Index, a reflection of prices at the wholesale level, increased at an annual basis of 0.3% to July, following no change year-on-year to June, and a 0.3% decline in May. Washington Today continues in a moment.
When citizens are truly informed, our republic thrives. Get informed straight from the source. On C-SPAN. Unfiltered, unbiased, word for word. From the nation's capital to wherever you are. Because the opinion that matters the most is your own. This is what democracy looks like. C-SPAN, powered by cable.
Welcome back to Washington Today, which you can get as a podcast on the C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you find your podcasts. A story from Newsmax: Republican presidential candidates, including former President Donald Trump, former Vice President Mike Pence, Governor Ron DeSantis, and 7 more are speaking this weekend at the Iowa State Fair. And Republican Senator Joni Ernst, who represents the state, tells Newsmax the fair is a fabulous opportunity for candidates to meet voters in person. She said, "We will have over 100,000 Iowans and others at the state fair, so it's a great time for them to press the flesh, shake hands, kiss some babies, and really stand up, whether it's at the Des Moines Register soapbox or participating in the Governor's Affair." That from Newsmax. The Governor's Affair she refers to is interviews that Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds, Republican, is doing with the Republican presidential candidates. She's named it the Fair Side Chats. One of those chats today was with former Vice President Mike Pence.
We ask Iowans to weigh in with some questions. So, gas prices are rising. Inflation is still a problem. The majority, probably 51% of Americans are still pessimistic about the economy. They still believe we're in a downturn and it's going to get worse. So Brett from Davenport wants to know, as president, what steps would you take? Well, of course, to lower gas and food prices, but to really deal with Bidenomics.
Well, Bidenomics is a failure, despite all the happy talk coming out of Washington, D.C. You can tell there's an election coming up because all of a sudden Democrats at the White House are telling you how their policies are all working. Kind of reminds me of what Groucho Marx said one time in an old movie. He said, "Who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes?" Right? I mean, the American people see what's happening out there. Inflation's up 16.6%. The war on energy by the Biden administration has caused gasoline prices to be up 60%. They just jumped up again last week. The crisis at our border is 100% man-made, and that man's name is Joe Biden. I mean, we secured the southern border of the United States of America by building hundreds of miles of wall, by negotiating a Remain in Mexico policy with the Mexicans and using Title 42. They dismantled all of that literally on day one. Now we have the worst border crisis in American history. What we're going to do about it is, I will tell you, I think I'm the first candidate for president in our party to come out with a plan to deal with inflation, and just this week we came out with a plan to achieve energy independence again. I mean, look, the inflation that's happening in America today, economists on the right and the left all know is because of runaway spending in Washington, D.C. Kim, you know something about balancing budgets and cutting taxes. We did that back when I was governor of Indiana as well, but when this administration came in office, worked with that Democrat Congress, they spent $2 trillion in unnecessary COVID spending. And every economist in the country agrees that that lit the pilot light on the worst inflation in 40 years. And so what we're going to do is we're going to get spending under control. We're going to cancel unexpended, unnecessary spending in Washington, D.C. And I promise you, as your president, we're going to drive toward balancing a federal budget, and we're going to reform these old programs to save our nation from a mountain range of debt. You know, I think, look, Social Security and Medicare are a promise we've made to the American people, right? We're going to keep that promise. You'll hear the demagogues again, you know, saying that Republicans are going to cut benefits to grandma. It's coming, you know, just put your armor on, all right? But I got to tell you, folks, we were hugging some kids on our way around the corner here, and we just had 3 of the most perfect granddaughters ever born in the history of the world in the last 2 years.
I have 11 of them.
Yeah. All right, now you're just bragging.
I know. Karen says I'm showing off. Yes, I am. Okay.
But we have a national debt the size of our nation's economy today. You know that, Governor. First time since World War II. And I think the time has come to have leadership in the White House that is honest with the American people and says, look, for everybody in retirement, we're not going to change anything. If you got hair the same color as me, it's not going to affect you at all. Frankly, anybody 40 years old or older, we're not going to change it. I don't believe in changing horses in the middle of the stream, right? But for anybody under the age of 40, like that young lady back there, I'd like to have a conversation. That maybe we can reform these New Deal programs and actually give you a better deal by making sure that Social Security and Medicare are actually there for you, and that this mountain range of debt that's driving inflation, it's going to literally bury our economy under debt, and what the Democrats want to do, higher taxes, isn't there. So I think tackling runaway spending, bringing about reform, and I'm going to tell you what, we did it before, we'll do it again. We're going to unleash American energy and allow the American people to achieve American energy independence and dominance once again.
Republican presidential candidate and former Vice President Mike Pence at the Iowa State Fair in Des Moines. A conversation with Governor Kim Reynolds, also Republican. At the end of their discussion, she threw out a few lighthearted questions, including one about the wide-ranging selection of food at the fair.
So you've been on the fairgrounds a couple days now. Favorite fair food that you've had or looking forward to having?
Haven't had a. Apparently, I have now had a lemon shake-up.
There we go. There we go.
I'm a lemon shake-up guy at the state fair, and can't leave without a corn dog.
Okay, awesome.
Although I think we're headed to the pork tent to go to work.
There you go.
In just a few minutes, but the Iowa Fair is many things. It's agriculture. It's fun. But for me, the Iowa State Fair is food.
It is food. I agree.
We're going to enjoy it, just like the rest of you.
Another thing, and you'll walk it off, so I'm quite confident that.
Republican presidential candidate Mike Pence with Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds. Governor Reynolds also spoke today with Republican presidential candidate and Miami Mayor Francis Suarez, and one of the topics they touched on was immigration.
Biden's border crisis is affecting all 50 states. We're experiencing it here, where what the statistics over the last 3 months are just really concerning, shocking, unconscionable. You know, but it still is a little bit worse in places like Texas and Arizona and Florida. So we asked Iowans to submit some questions, and Katie from Madison County wanted to know what 3 specific actions you'd take to control the border.
Well, I was there yesterday, and I saw the difference in intentionality from the last administration to this administration. I literally stood in a junction where the last administration's wall stopped and this administration's wall began. And to give you a sense, one of the walls was about 30 feet high, unclimbable. The other one, my 9-year-old would have had fun climbing in about 2 seconds. So I think we need to be intentional about protecting our border. We need to, instead of, you want to defund something, let's defund the 87,000 IRS agents. Why don't we defund that? And why don't we use that for Border Patrol agents? And why don't we use that for technology to make sure that our border is safe? And then the last thing is, I think we really need to designate the cartels a terrorist organization. They are flooding our streets with fentanyl. 80 to 90,000 Americans die every year. That is the equivalent of a 747 crashing every single day. Think about the national tragedy that was the submersibles that collapsed. Think about if a 747 were crashing every day. And that's not even to talk about the human trafficking crisis, which has now become a bigger revenue generator for the cartels than drugs. It's awful. I don't know how many of you have seen Sound of Freedom, but the executive producer, I don't know how many of you guys seen Sound of Freedom? Yeah? So it was executive produced in part by someone who lives in Miami, and he was telling me the story of what they do with kids. And as a father, it's just shocking. And we need to have a strong president that projects American strength. We have a president right now that is projecting weakness, and that is emboldening our enemies across the world to get more aggressive. And we're seeing that aggression, and it's creating problems for us.
Miami Mayor Francis Suarez, Republican presidential candidate, and Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds, also Republican. The governor is doing interviews with many candidates, although not with former President Donald Trump. You'll be able to find all the videos at cspan.org. The CBS affiliate in Chicago reporting that Vice President Kamala Harris will be in the city to speak at an annual conference on gun safety Friday afternoon. They write she's headlining the Everytown for Gun Safety Action Fund's annual conference. It brings together thousands of activists, volunteers, and survivors of gun violence to talk about the progress of the gun safety movement.
As Vice President of the United States, I'm acutely aware of the fact that gun violence is the leading cause of death of the children of America. It's the number one cause of death, not some disease. Well, although this is a form of a disease, to be sure. Gun violence is the leading cause of death of our children. I don't need to tell anybody here, but for those watching and listening from afar, 1 in 5 Americans has a family member that was killed by gun violence. And when we think then about the tragedy of that, and we consider that each incident that occurs, be it an incident that was a mass shooting, or everyday gun violence, or suicide by gun, or an accidental shooting because there was not a lockbox and a safe box. When we think about it, we know that it is so much bigger than the tragedy of that one incident. The ramifications of it to the individuals who are directly impacted, to the community then that is impacted, and to all of society, and for a lifetime often. I think that we rightly, and the leaders here rightly, characterize this as a crisis that requires leadership, because the solutions don't require, by the way, a whole lot of creativity.
Right?
So, it's not like we need to do. Absolutely. And so I very seriously responded to your question with my point about voting, because the reality of it is so much of this issue can be addressed by common sense, reasonable gun safety laws, but we need elected leaders to have the courage to act.
Right. Say it again. Say it again.
I think we have some in the room.
Vice President Kamala Harris at the Everytown for Gun Safety Action Fund's annual conference in Chicago. The group calls it Gun Sense University. A story in the Chicago Sun-Times reads, when Vice President Kamala Harris is in Chicago on Friday to headline the Everytown for Gun Safety Conference she will hold before she speaks, an off-the-books private meeting with a small group of young gun violence prevention activists. Unreported until now, Vice President Harris, who has youth voter turnout in her portfolio, has been conducting listening sessions across the country to better understand the issues youths care about. That is, the 18 to 25-year-old Gen Zers and the up to 29-year-old millennials. The Biden-Harris 2024 campaign knows a big youth vote is key to winning a second term. Young voters, if they vote, trend Democratic. Reporting from the Chicago Sun-Times. C-SPAN's Book TV on Saturday will be live at the National Book Festival in Washington, D.C. We spoke to C-SPAN producer John McCardle for the details.
We're going to have live coverage of this year. It's the 23rd National Book Festival, and C-SPAN's Book TV has covered every single one of them, dating back to 2001. This year, we're going to be live 9 a.m. until 5:45 p.m., and viewers on Book TV are going to be able to see panel discussions, stage interviews. Our C-SPAN set is right there in the convention center, right in the main atrium. And we're going to have authors come up and chat with Peter Slen, our host, and take calls from Book TV viewers. We're going to be doing that throughout the day. We'll have Librarian of Congress Carla Hayden stop by. Chasten Buttigieg is one of the authors featured this year. He'll stop by, take some phone calls as well. Author R.K. Russell, former NFL football player, wrote a book called The Yards Between Us. He's actually featured on his own panel and will be on our set. So it's going to be a full day of coverage, and we're going to be kicking off the day, if you want to jump in a little bit early, at 8 a.m., we're going to be showing the opening ceremony. That takes place every year, the Friday before the Saturday Book Festival. So it's taking place tonight at the Library of Congress. And they also have some of the featured authors there. So we're going to show that as sort of the lead-in to our all-day live coverage.
You mentioned some of the authors. What are some of the topics of these books that we're going to hear about?
One of the panelist discussions I'm really interested in is Accidental Spies is the name of the panel. John Lyle will be there. His book, The Dirty Tricks Department, as sort of the precursor to the CIA, a look back, a history there. Janet Wallach, Flirting with Disaster, about a famous spy as well. Jeff Pegues of CBS is going to be the moderator of that. Talked about R.K. Russell, the former NFL player, his book, The Yards Between Us, his story about coming out as a bisexual athlete in the NFL, and what happened when he came out, after he came out. That's going to be moderated by LZ Granderson of the LA Times, a discussion on what food has to say about us, about national dishes around the world and what that says about culture. So those are some of the panel discussions. And again, lots of good C-SPAN viewer calls as well. So you never know where those calls will go, but those are always fun as well.
What is the history of the National Book Festival and C-SPAN's involvement in it?
Sure. It got started back on September the 8th of 2001. First Lady Laura Bush and then Librarian of Congress James Billington decided that they were going to start a national book festival. These book festivals have been happening around the country, but there wasn't one here in D.C., a national book festival, and brought in the Library of Congress to host it. And it's grown over the years, obviously. For several years it took place on the National Mall. Now it's in the Washington Convention Center, a little bit easier to control the weather that way when you're in the convention center. But this year there's going to be 70 authors. Back at that first one, I think it was about 40 authors who participated back in 2001. At its height, I think it was 2015, there was 175 authors that were doing various panel discussions and book signings. But it has certainly grown over the years. And as I said, C-SPAN's been covering it since the beginning. Book TV, actually, this is our 25th year, our 25th anniversary year for Book TV. So we're just about 2 years older than the National Book Festival.
C-SPAN producer John McCardle. Again, Book TV's live coverage of the National Book Festival starts Saturday at 9 a.m. Eastern on C-SPAN 2 television, on the C-SPAN Now mobile app, and streamed at cspan.org. And C-SPAN Radio will start live coverage after the Washington Journal program at 10 a.m. Eastern. And if you're thinking about going in person to the D.C. Convention Center, the Library of Congress has tweeted, "The National Book Festival is free, fun, family-friendly, and air-conditioned. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter, Word for Word, to get the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox every day. Subscribe at C-SPAN.org/connect. Have a good night and weekend.